Hello, welcome. Glad you're here. Glad you're paying attention to the news on COVID-19 as it continues from all sorts of sources. I hope you're not watching the actual news at all. That would be my number one goal for you, is to ignore all news from all news stations as it relates to COVID and only hunt data for yourself or from those who you know who hunt data. Please do not pay attention to the news. It would be great because they'd have to stop reporting the news if they weren't being paid attention to. So I had a post earlier today, and now I am going to discuss that a little bit, the post, and then kind of what I said was coming. So the post, antibodies, yay, antibodies, immunity. So just again to remind all of you that even though you're hearing a lot of like, well, how much immunity do you have? Just know mutation is common in viruses. You do have immunity to viruses all the time. Even with mutation, it's the way it kind of works. So if you get a massive mutation to kind of a new strain, is what you'd call it, or new strand, then it's a different level of immunity that you're looking for. We're not there yet for coronavirus, so SARS-CoV-2, if you've had it, you have immunity to it right now still. Yay, awesome news. Anytime they've looked and said, oh, they were infected and then they were better and then they were reinfected again, all those have been redacted at this point in time, scientifically anyways, in the literature, as having never fully recovered in the first place. So, all right, with that, I did mention in this post that I was going to just talk briefly in a post, and this is the post, about... Did I even tell you what I was going to talk about? I did. Lockdown versus non-lockdown. So I think it's pretty important to take a look at countries that did not shut down in any kind of meaningful way and just get a sense of what that looks like. So I have, this was shared with me by a friend, and so I'm just using the countries that he shared. There are others that might be of interest to discuss. I'll discuss at least one of those as we get towards the end here. This is Italy here. You can see the high spike, and then they've been pretty much over this for a long time. These are deaths that I'm looking at too, not cases. So, and FYI, we care more about deaths than we do about cases. Cases is insignificant for two major reasons. One, that there's a lot of people who've had asymptomatic, positive cases and positive infection, and those people, we would largely say for them the flu is worse. So, and I have a very strong theory on what the data is telling us on that now. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. So it seems like it's age stratified risk, right? But the reality is it's comorbidity, and comorbidities just happen to go up with age. So if you're under the age of 70, your risk of death is almost, just zero, right? 0.004%. It's crazy, right? But that just means that the comorbidities are low. If your comorbidity is a combination, and I'd say typically you're more likely to have, if you have multiple comorbidities, you're more likely to have some stuff. So you could say, well, but they were a healthy individual, they're healthy. Don't teach me about the outliers. Again, whenever we get to outliers, now, you're talking about the risk of living. You're not going to stop this virus in any meaningful way, and I'm going to show you that. The reality is, if you have a lot of comorbidities that relate to inflammatory condition, diabetes, heart disease, then you're probably more at risk. It even seems as though those who are immunocompromised haven't had such a significant issue looking at the data. Looking at Florida, and you find that these 100-year-olds, tons of them, supposedly the data is saying 100-year-olds have recovered from COVID-19 in Florida. So that's pretty positive news. But I guarantee if they had double comorbidities that were inflammatory, they probably didn't recover. So that's the key. So now as we look at that, so that really helps us to kind of stratify this risk and understand this a little bit, that risk is really based upon your personal risks, not just age. And so then we look and we realize that for school-age children, each of the last 5 flu seasons have killed more school-age children than COVID. So I think that's an important thing to continue to remember. Granted, as you open up schools, there'll be a lot more positive cases, and I would say that that's actually a good thing. Will some child die? Yes, some child will die. Will some adults die? Absolutely. Could you have stopped their deaths in some way, shape, or form? I don't, if we kept school out of session, I don't know. know. Maybe theirs wouldn't. Maybe they wouldn't have died. But just do a search for Robert Redfield, the CDC director, and read everything he's been putting out there, and you realize, that way more children. Do you realize that 3,070 children attempt a suicide every single day in our country? And those numbers are up as much as 8 times in certain teenage populations now. I mean, it's really bad. So that's a lot different than 80-ish kids now who have died, who are school-age children from COVID, versus these kids. And you say, well, yeah, but my kid wasn't ever going to do that, and then they got COVID and died. And I'm not saying that doesn't matter. I just don't know that these, to me, a child who's going to actually get COVID and dies is probably more susceptible to actually influenza and having a mortality concern with influenza as well. So, I mean, we try to know what we know about our health so we can make wise decisions for ourselves, not on a, global scale where, you try to mitigate all damage to everybody for everything. It just doesn't work that way. So sorry, back over to this post. So Italy, 583 deaths per million, which is a lot when you compare to other countries, but largely done with this for a long time. Sweden, 572 deaths per million. These countries didn't have any significant lockdown, really. Like Italy tried to control it, but it was an early thing, and they didn't really do it right, and then it was, and it was kind of open again, and just wasn't a meaningful lockdown. Sweden, obviously not a meaningful lockdown, 572 deaths per million, but largely done with this thing for a period of time now, since early July. FYI, this is 50 deaths per day here on this scale, so 50 is this line here, where on the Italy it's 200 here, so just to help you see that the scale isn't the same all the way through. All right? Then we get over to countries who had some kind of partial shutdown, right? The U.S. is a great example of a partial shutdown. We closed down pretty tight, and then we opened up, and we kind of opened up probably more than anyone else. We're at 513 deaths per million. You can see, if you remember early on, I talked a lot about the second camel hump, and that second, it's not really a second wave, so to speak. That's considered more of a seasonal thing, but you could call it a second wave in this case if you want. It's basically, ramp up, back down, back up again, and then we're kind of, if you look at kind of where the cases look now and the deaths that in certain states, it looks like we're leveling off or even coming back down again. 513 deaths per million, that's where we are. So on a number of deaths per million. And then you look at the United Kingdom, their data came off awfully weird here. I didn't go looking for other, again, this was shared by a friend, I didn't go looking for other sources, but regardless, it just kind of shows, they had, they recorded a lot here in this chart all one day. 609 deaths per million, though, is what we're looking at. And theirs have been staying relatively low. So they had a lot, though, early on compared to us. And now they've seemed to really been low for quite a while. By the way, their scale, which is it's done this way just to make up to allow that peak to be on the scale. That's 1,000. So ours is 1,000 here as well. Where the last graphs, again, it was 250, 200 for Italy and 50 for Sweden. So help you kind of see the data. And then here we have these countries that totally locked down. And right now, on a number, they look good. I'm going to tell you, the first one's Australia, 80 deaths per million. 80. We're at 609 for UK, Australia at 80. That's crazy, right? So there's a couple things to consider. Population density is a big one, right? We got to remember population density can allow for some control, for sure, in hopes that, you can have pockets that just don't ever see infection, possibly. And that's, is that possible? Yeah, it is. As long as you don't have any global, activity, you'd be fine. If you do, well, you're maybe not going to be fine. And then also Israel, 71 deaths per million. So doing quite well from the standpoint of total deaths per million. But what about the current state of the country and how they feel about everything going on? You can see here's Australia. That's a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. They're just starting their ramp up for the first time now, when you have, parts of the world that are pretty much saying, oh, we're over this now. We're good. We've got our immunity. We've seen it. And like in all infectious diseases, those who are more susceptible will tend to be the ones who die in that early, that early transmission. And then as you move further through, you get to lower and lower and lower and lower death rates. And that's just kind of how it goes. It's kind of why influenza claims lives every year. It's the most susceptible, the most susceptible, the most susceptible every year, right? So then down here, Israel is 71, and again, we see they're tracking up, and it's kind of very, very erratic in how their data is reporting. We always like to see moving 7-day averages or 14-day averages to get a better, smoother line, because it helps. Just helps to get a sense of which direction we're going, what's our rate change, and all these wonderful things. Day to day, it's insignificant because the data reporting can't be done perfectly smooth from day to day. So, and then lastly, so the question came, well, what do you think about New Zealand and what New Zealand did? So lastly, let's talk about New Zealand. And I think this is a pretty, 103,000 square miles for the country of New Zealand, with a population of about 5 million people. So a pretty small population for that land size. So not a huge country by any stretch, right? But still, for the total number of people, they've got plenty of space. Full on shutdown, full lockdown. I mean, just done, right? Only 4 deaths per million, which sounds like, wow, full lockdown is totally the way to go if you have that kind of population density where there's so little, a jamming and cramming of space, plenty of space to get away from people. Makes all the sense in the world, right? We should lock down. Eric, you were wrong. They should lock down like them. So then the question then becomes, when do you ever open your borders? So they saw one of their highest death rates in months just the other day. I think it was 9 deaths happened in one day, from 0 for a long, long, long time. And so that's what happens. As soon as you let people start to move again, then it's going to spread. And as soon as you let people come into your country, it's going to spread. It's just how it is. It's how all viruses are. And this isn't some unique, oh my gosh, coronavirus deal. It's just how it works. So my take on New Zealand is that they will have to remove themselves from the global economy for potentially years if they really want to keep it under this kind of control. And then obviously they didn't fully eradicate it on their shores when you consider that they thought they did, and now they just suddenly had these 9 deaths. A virus will do what a virus will do. I've said before, you could take, and quarantine 7.8 billion people, and you still got enough people left to keep this thing moving for a long, long time. I know, it seems crazy, doesn't it? What do I have, 100,000 people? It's enough. So it's one of those things that I think it's important to get, that we're getting to a place right now where our most susceptible, look at the death rates in general for US. They've been relative to the actual positive cases, nice and low. So we're there. I think we're really there. Largely, you've got states in certain areas that are completely, over it. Immunity is, widespread, and we're going to see really, really positive results out of those areas. We've got some areas like Georgia right now where we're a little bit more on that ramp still. But the good news, again, comes back to right now we're seeing a lot of cases with kids. And kids, according to the data, not like, oh, that random story of one kid or the 7-year-old who died in Georgia, and then you look back and you realize there was actually a drowning involved because of a seizure that was unattended. So it's a sad story, but it's important to really look at the data. And again, is it possible to save everyone? It never has been. I don't know why we would think it is now. Is it possible to save a number of people? Yes, but honestly, it comes down to those people fully understanding their own personal risks and mitigating themselves. They're the ones. And can you do it? I see these people walking around, and I'm amazed at how many people you'll see walking around who are touching mask, touching face, touching eye, and you're collecting things on your mask, and then you're touching yourself with everything that was on your mask. You're more at risk. Or the person who's saying, I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to be very careful, and then they make a mistake and they drag their hand across a railing somewhere, and then they go touch their mouth. I see this happening all the time. So those are the people, though. If you're not concerned, then whatever, I don't care. I touch my face too. I'm not concerned. I'd rather have it, and probably have had it given the number of people I've been taking care of over these months. But I think those people who just would choose not to have it and don't want to get it and really want to stay away from it, for sure, like I'm scared, I think I'm at risk. Well, it's really up to you to not do all those things. That's what it comes down to. This idea that some asymptomatic person is going to come up and breathe in your air and you're going to get it because they were asymptomatic but had it. That to me, that's fairy tale all day long. And why? Because as I look at the science and the data, there's nothing that supports that. It's you hear, oh, the experts say. Well, I consider myself as much of an expert from the years of reading this as most of these guys. Just paying attention. I just got to pay attention to data. Just so you know, it's not that hard to become an expert on past pandemics. All you have to do is actually dig, look, and see. Because guess what? Those are done. And when they're done, it's all right there for you to see. So I know some of you really can't stand, me talking like this, like it's simple and da da da. I don't know what to say other than I do care about everybody. But when someone says like, oh, you must not care about people, I come right back with, well, can you validate that statement? Why would you think? And I've got one person who ever can come back with anything scientific. Everyone else, it's always emotional. So if you're using your emotion to make decisions in your life, anywhere in your life, you're usually making bad decisions. It should be a combination of what your philosophical bend is, and then the data and the logic with that, and then you can bring emotion in for some decisions. But typically people who make emotional decisions don't actually rely on the logic and the data. So I'm just thinking it's smart to use those. All right, I hope that's very, well, I don't know if it's really eye-opening, but intriguing to most. So it's still not done. We've got a good rearview mirror, but we're still not done. So it's going to be interesting to see, do Australia and Israel, are they able to keep their deaths per million below a couple hundred or below 500 even, with such strong lockdowns now that they're kind of trying to come out of the lockdown and they're seeing the numbers rise like crazy. Right back into lockdown, right back out of lockdown, right back into lockdown. Like I said before, the area under the curve is the area under the curve. Delay it or not, it is the area under the curve. The same number of people typically will end up dying. Just like in 1918, you look at the shelter in place, you look at all of that, you go out a little bit further, you account for population density, and you realize there's a pretty strong case for normalized deaths per million across all cities in America, regardless of what they did.